Hi, welcome to my second Macro Express Pro tutorial. In the first tutorial I talked about Macro Express as a program and its menu options, and even got into the activation methods for a macro. In this tutorial I'm going to discuss a lot of the commands that you can use in macros. So let's get started by editing our sample macro here. I simply double-clicked on it to open it. Now there's menu options here, and you'll want to explore that a little bit to get a better feel for what you can do inside this macro editor. You've got save, save and close, save all, etc., etc., etc. Down here at the bottom you have a tab for each macro that you have open. You can edit multiple macros at the same time. This first tab here you have all of the commands that you can work with inside of a macro. Our next tab is activations. And you should recognize this if you watched my previous tutorial. These are the ways that you can activate this macro. You can actually add one of each of these types if you wish. Variables, you can have control, decimal, integer, and text. They can be named variables. Some miscellaneous options. Scope, you can specify, is this a global macro? Does it run wherever and whenever, or is it only run when a specific window or program are selected, or is it global except for a specific window or program? You have security, where you can specify that I don't want to protect this macro with a password, or I want to use a single password to protect both run and edit, or I want to edit and run with different passwords. We'll leave that as do not, and then notes if you so desire. Before we get started with commands, I wanted to talk a little bit more about variables. A variable is simply a place for a macro to put a value before it's ready for it. So it can store numeric values like integers, which is a whole number, or decimals, or it can store a text value. Well, Macro Express Pro has quite an advantage over Macro Express in that Macro Express only had T and up to 99 values for text values. Macro Express Pro, you can do named variables, and virtually as many as you like. And on top of that, let's say that we needed 10 time values. Well, we can make this into an array of 10. Now, time position 1 has one value, time position 2 is another value, and so on up to 10. This adds a lot of power to Macro Express Pro, and some of the commands actually use it too. Okay, let's move on to the commands. So under CD-ROM you can see we have all of the options that you might want to use to control your CD-ROM. I don't really use these very often, so I'm going to move on to Clipboard. Now Clipboard has a lot of useful commands. You have copy, cut, empty, paste. One of the useful commands is append text. This will allow you to take what's in your clipboard and append it to a file. Or you could simply save what's in your clipboard to the file. Another command that you can use here is type clipboard text, and that will type wherever your cursor is. So let's put that one in, and if I want to add a command right above here, like copy, I can use this top button and you'll see that it inserts it above. Now if I want to insert right below clipboard copy, I can use this button here. And if I want to insert one at the very end, I can use this one here. Now you can use these arrows over here to change the order of your commands. You can use this one to copy. You can also do Control-C, Control-V to copy and paste. This button here will add a line comment to just that line, if you so desire. This button will disable the line, and you could select multiple lines and disable them. This button will show us the direct editor, and this is what the commands actually look like under the covers, if you will. I don't expect you will use that very often. Now I'm not going to use these commands, so I'm going to go ahead and delete those. And let's move on to debug. Here you can see we have several commands for doing debug. You can catch errors and log errors and whatnot. When catch error, we have several options here. We can catch specific events that take place and do something about them. Here you can see in desktop there are a few commands that you may or may not use. I don't tend to use them very often, but minimizing all, restoring all, etc., etc. Dialogues have very valuable commands to us. They allow us to give the user information or get information from the user. For example, message box is a very simple message box. It simply has a title and a message. We can also choose an icon if we so desire. I'm not going to for this example. And as I test run, you'll notice there's a dialog here. This is Macro Express Pro allowing you to select a window to activate before we run our macro, because we're testing it through the editor. I'm not going to change the window right now. So you'll see that we get our success message, and it showed up right in the middle of the screen. We don't have any control over where it's positioned or its size. That's where text box display comes in. This allows us to give a message and not only that, but we can position this. We can manually custom the shape and size. Oh, that's pretty good. Do I want it on the left? Do I want it on the top, in the corner? How about centered? So I'll say save. And you see we also have a couple options like always on top, keep focus. So we have a little more control over this display. So I'll say OK, and I'll delete the other one, and we'll have a look at what this looks like. There we are. I have completed your task. I don't need this anymore, so I'm going to go ahead and delete it. Update text box would take a dialog that you've created with this particular header, or title if you will, and update its contents to whatever you have here. Multiple choice menu allows us to get information from the user. We can ask a question and they can select one, or they can select multiple choices. How this would work is you would set a variable here, and then give it a title, and a prompt, and some answers. Now if we choose save item by value, it will place inside our variable the letter A if they choose yes, or the letter B if they choose no. If we choose item by text, it will actually place yes or no in the variable depending on what they picked. And once again, you can position manually on this option. Now one thing I want to show you while I have this open is NonError. Most of the commands have an NonError tab, and these are specific actions that might happen or not happen with this particular object or command. And then you can select what you want to do based on that option. This will allow you to do more debugging and figure out what's going wrong with your script. Explorer gives us a way to open a folder on the Windows machine. Special Explorer folder would give you the option to just open a folder based on the type rather than on a specific path. Files and Folders has several useful commands. We can copy files, delete files, rename files, move files. We can do those with folders as well, or change the folder or directory. Let me show you delete files and folders. You can specify a file path here and show the dialog box progress, recurse into subfolders using wildcards, and you can delete them permanently rather than putting them into your recycling bin. We can also text file begin process. This allows us to open a text file and do something with each line in the text file. We specify the file, we specify the line number that we want to start on, and then we specify whether we want all the rest of the lines or just a few of them. We can specify how many we want. We place those into a variable while we're working on them. Well, how would that be different from ASCII file begin process? ASCII file begin process, we also open a text file and begin to process it, but we choose the type. Is it comma separated value? Is it tab delimited or ASCII delimited? For example, a tab-delimited text file would have a value, a tab, a value, a tab, a value, and then maybe a line break, and then you have your next line. You also begin processing in a specified line, and you also choose whether you want all records or just a specified number. But then we put it in an array. And each of those values separated by tabs, for example, would go into a different position within the array. You can also parse blank lines, and you can clear the array before processing the file. Under Internet, we have a couple of commands that stand out as very useful: email send and website. If you use FTP, these FTP commands could be useful as well. With email send, we can specify who we want to send it to. We can ask the user at runtime to specify who we want to send it to. We can select a message that we have defined here, or we can ask at runtime what the user wants the message to be. We can pull it from the clipboard, or we can select it from a file. We can also attach files to our email before we send it. With website, you specify the URL here, and you can choose, do you want it to open in your default browser or Internet Explorer. With that, I'm going to conclude this tutorial, but look for the next one because there are a lot of valuable commands coming up here.